Hi, Photo 7 students. I wanted to give you an overview of some projects that students have done for the documentary project. It might help you sort of think about what your project could be about. Remember that you have to complete the journal that that puts out some ideas about this project. The sooner you put the journal ideas down, I will give you feedback as soon as possible. You want to start shooting this project right away. So let me go through some student projects. This one is sort of a classic kind of documentary. Think of it as a journalistic kind of opinion piece or something you might see in a magazine or some kind of internet magazine. So this particular one was about having lawns during the drought. And so the student took this picture and then showed the classic hosing down of the concrete or brick, and then washing the car and letting the hose run. And then they showed a picture of the aqueduct and then a sort of alternative to that lawn. So that's 5 pictures that really tell the story. Imagine that these are a photo story or narrative accompanying an article about that. Here's another one that takes a different approach. This one is about people who have these little mini libraries in their front yards. I don't know if you've seen them. Sometimes whole neighborhoods will do them where they put books in these little houses, and then you can take a book or leave a book. So it becomes this free exchange of books. And this type of project is less of a narrative like the first one and more of what's called a typology, where you can think of it as taking a type, like little mailboxes that house these lending libraries. And then you try and photograph it in a similar way. So you have a thesis or an idea, and then you carry it out through very similar projects or photographs, but those show the differences between each one instead of telling a story. So that's that one. Here's one where a student actually worked at Target, and they were in charge of bringing back all the shopping carts, which they had many stories of finding them all over the place. Sometimes even, I want to go back. Like sometimes they'd be left just beside the place where you're supposed to put it. So anyway, they were sort of irritated by that. And then they showed a kind of alternative to that. I think this is at Walmart, where you left a deposit to get your shopping cart. Okay, now this brings up a really good topic. This is inside a post office, and this comes up quite often. When you go to do your documentary, you really want to think about what do you have access to? This is one of the questions in the documentary journal. And so there is no way that this student could have done this project unless they were a postman. So they had total access. I still sort of wonder how they got in, and taking pictures, but they did. So they wanted to show kind of the cycle of what happens to packages in the post office. And I've never even seen the inside of a post office like this. And then when I saw this, I'm like, so wonder I get broken things in my mail. And then they wanted to show kind of the completion of that process at the mailbox. So I thought that was a really good one. This one actually happened to be when I was teaching online during the pandemic. And so we were on lockdown, and I had to have people really rethink how they did the documentary project because they couldn't go out into the world. And I thought this student did a great job of showing the keyhole and then the outside environment. And these were quite beautiful shots. So the thing to remember is when you're doing this project, don't forget about everything you learned in Project 1, the 100 square feet, where you think about leading lines. This is kind of a type of framing. And then they actually made this for the project, and then they included a poem. So even when you're stuck inside. There's still ways you could make a documentary. And then people take like really interesting twist on things. So this was a documentary about a cemetery. But what they did is they were really photographing the flowers that people leave. But such a nice use of depth of field. Like, I didn't expect this one at all. And I think it's pretty interesting. Okay, this one. So again, I urge you to do something close to home, not something where you drive really far into LA or something like that, and do something that you personally are either involved in. Maybe you volunteer somewhere, maybe you are part of a club, or something where you can really show, your access or your interest in something. And so this student wanted to photograph the Coca-Cola bottling company that's in Upland. But Coca-Cola is one of the most sort of airtight, they lock up the recipe in a vault. And so she wrote to the manager, wanted to know if she could come in and do a documentary, and they said, no way. So like that video that's called Work the Scene, where you really think about how can you pivot, because this is the important part of being a journalist, is you get to a situation and it may not, first you do a lot of planning, but then when you get there, it may not be what you think. So in this case, they could not get in, so they photographed the outside, and then they were basically out on the sidewalk. As long as you're on a public sidewalk, you are allowed to photograph. The minute you're on private land, then you have to adhere to whatever their security is. So, for example, if you go to Victoria Gardens and try and photograph, they will kick you out because that is actually private property, even though it looks like a public street. Whereas if you're in a park, that is a city park or state park, you're completely allowed to photograph. So you do have to know something about the law, where if you're invading privacy or private companies, you need to get permission. Even if you work there, you probably want to talk to your manager. So in this case, they couldn't get in. So what they did is they did a sort of pivot and did a type of almost secretive surveillance. And I actually think it came out better. I love this, where the Coca-Cola trucks are behind this, really fenced off area. So it became a totally different project, and that may happen. That's why you need to start right away, immediately. So then you'll be able to make that pivot. Some people in the class even try to start 2 different documentary projects, and then they see which one works out. So that was the Coca-Cola plant. So everything was done from the sidewalk and the street. That's a great picture. Okay, this one falls under the typology idea. What their thesis was is they wanted to show parks, public bathrooms, and a very particular kind that is built mostly to the specs of the state. And so you see that this is like very generic, and you'll see they went to different parks all around the Inland Empire. And what they wanted to show, like this is the same layout, slightly nicer maintained, more nicely maintained. And this is what they wanted to show, was that there were quite a few differences between affluent areas and then parts of the city that didn't have as much money. And so this was at a sports facility, but still the same layout. And then they started looking at places that weren't as maintained. Like you can see that the building, there was some graffiti where the water fountains are, and then they didn't match the color exactly. And this was the ultimate one. I thought this was so funny, like funny or sad, I'm not sure. But look at the roof here on the left. It's totally destroyed. And then if you look at the right, basically right in front of the restrooms are these outhouses. So that one is kind of like the most insane in terms of being dilapidated. But what the student did is they maintained the same point of view, the exact same angle. Like if you look at each one, They tried to keep the same angle looking at each building. And that's what lets you really examine the differences. So this is really the definition of a typology. This one's more of a narrative story. So a student wanted to show that right across from the house that her family was living in, they were building a giant Amazon warehouse. And so she started out taking this picture. And again, this goes to like really thinking about what you're shooting as you go. This is an interesting shot. And then it was constant construction. But then she felt frustrated, like it wasn't really showing what it was like to be there. And so she did this thing where she photographed her house, but then from the side of where they were building the warehouse. But then she went into the backyard and reversed the angle the other way. And take a look at this picture. Like, this is exactly the kind of thing you want to examine. Like, how do I show the idea? And in this one, what she did was from the backyard, looking at the warehouse, you could really see how different the kind of construction is and how kind of devastating it would be to be living to seeing that constructed right in front of your house. They were planning on moving, but boy, does that tell the story. So where your point of view is really makes a difference. This one was about a power plant. They had access to it because they worked there. So this is a pretty interesting documentary. Okay, this is one of those secretive ones. I don't actually recommend this, but I still think it's really interesting. Many of my students have worked at Starbucks, and this student wanted to show how much stuff gets thrown away on a daily basis. She couldn't really get permission to go in and shoot this, obviously. She went to a completely different Starbucks, not the one that she works at. And what she found in the trash was this. And it's pretty crazy because that's a lot of food being thrown away. And so she did a great job of photographing that. And then this is kind of what's called the establishing shot. So that's what allows you to know what the project's about. That is a very important part of the documentary. This is someone photographing fire tech training, and they were part of this. So that's why they were able to get access. You kind of have to know someone. So think about who you know and what they do and how you can, get permission to photograph that. This was a teacher, and they wanted to show the life of a grade school teacher. And I love these pictures. I love this one. You've earned extra recess if your name is on the list. It's probably the whole class, but who knows? I thought that was a great shot, though. And then they're taking a test. And then just sort of the chaos of the classroom. This is someone whose family had a printing business. So they had an inside kind of view of this. And one thing I recommend, first of all, is that having a person in the picture really helps to humanize the picture. So not every picture has to have a person, but it does help to have a person in there just to sort of give it some interest. And the other thing is you guys might need a tripod. We can check out tripods to you if you come on campus, or you can use, there's a video about how to use a bag of rice, but you might have low lighting. So you can always email me if you need some tips after your first photo shoot. And I will give you feedback after the first time you shoot. So post as soon as possible. And let's see, this was in a tuxedo shop. Oh, by the way, I love this picture. Isn't that beautiful? And so it was a tuxedo rental where they customize. This one is about construction in the Inland Empire. Now, there is no way you'd be able to photograph this unless you were part of that team, which the student was. So they were able to get some sort of inside view. This is my student was a dentist. She was taking a photo class, but she actually had a job as a dentist. So some of this is pretty interesting. So think about that in terms of the 100 square feet shot, right? So you don't want to let that go out the window. Make sure you really think about leading lines, depth of field, all the things, texture, repetition. This was a business of shoe repair. And frankly, you could approach this assignment as if it were a kind of like you were taking pictures for someone's website. You know, when you go on to a company's website and it has that little tab that says about, this would be a great way to use your project. Like, do it for real for a company you might know or a friend's company. And so this is leather dye, sewing, kind of a really nice insider's view. And then this one's more conceptual. So maybe you're getting the idea here that this project can go a lot of different directions. It could be real nuts and bolts, like pictures for someone's website. It could be more storytelling, socioeconomic, that does something bother you? Is something interesting to you? Or it can be a typology where you take a certain thing and really push it. The key is not to make it a portrait project. So often people get confused and they start doing the portrait over again. And so this student started out thinking they wanted to do it about a single person who used their cell phone too much. And I'm like, no, you can't do that, but it can be about how people experience the world through their cell phone. So they kind of changed it up to make it a documentary, to make it an opinion piece as opposed to a portrait. And so they wanted to show, all the generations out in nature, but looking at their phone. So you can see that's not a portrait. You can see there's an idea there. And in this case, too, she wanted to, this is obviously set up, but I really like this photo in terms of people oops, oh my gosh, sorry about that. See, that was amazing timing. I got a spam call right when I was talking about cell phone use. Okay, that was not on purpose, but I could pretend it is. Anyway, so then, they're looking up trees on their phone. And I thought this was good too, in terms of the fact that they really didn't connect except through their phone. So this one was really interesting to me. And then this last one is sort of a compare and contrast about the old Inland Empire, probably about the time I started teaching, where people had a lot of land. Like you can see the wall way in the back there, that it might be a small house on a giant piece of land, a lot of open space. Same here, like people had front yards and backyards. And then the new Inland Empire. So what you see being built off the 210, this is sort of the new way of living. And what they wanted to show is how little open space these houses have, that they were, built very close together, and that this is the only open space. And so that's it for my slide lecture about how to do the documentary project. Your idea can be just as different. You can see how different all of these are. So think about who you are, what you're interested in. Do you have any hobbies? Do you work somewhere? What is bothering you? What's interesting to you? And start this documentary project right away. Okay, email me if you have any questions, and I hope you have fun doing this project.